Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab. Now let's begin. The C-130's engines still rattled in Brandon Welch's ears as he stepped onto American soil for the first time in 11 months. His boots hit the tarmac at Fort Benning with the kind of solid weight that only came from carrying 80 pounds of gear through the Hindu Kush. 27 missions. Not all his squad made it back, but he had. Again. The Georgia sun felt strange after Afghanistan's mountain cold. Brandon shouldered his duffel and moved through the arrival terminal with the efficient economy of a man who'd learned not to waste motion. Around him, other soldiers reunited with families, tearful wives, excited kids, proud parents. He scanned the crowd out of habit, looking for the two faces that mattered. Neither was there. Brandon pulled out his phone. Dead. Of course. 11 months, and he'd forgotten to charge it stateside. He borrowed a charger at a USO station and waited, watching the battery icon crawl upward. When it finally powered on, there were no messages. No missed calls from Marcia. Nothing from his father-in-law Stanley Flynn, who usually picked him up when Marcia was working her nursing shifts. Just one text from a neighbor, Mrs. Chun, call me when you land. Important. The knot that had lived in Brandon's gut through every firefight, every patrol, every moment away from his son tightened. He called. Mrs. Chun answered on the first ring. Brandon, thank God. I didn't know if Leo's been alone. 3 days now, maybe 4. I brought him food yesterday, but he wouldn't come inside. He's waiting for you. Brandon's blood went cold. What do you mean alone? Where's Marcia? Gone. They're all gone. I'm so sorry. He didn't remember the cab ride home. Didn't remember what he paid the driver or whether he thanked him. The world had narrowed to a single point. The house at the end of Maple Street. The house he'd bought with his combat pay. The house where his son was supposed to be safe. Leo sat on the porch, a small figure dwarfed by an oversized suitcase. 12 years old and waiting like a soldier himself. Back straight, eyes forward. When he saw Brandon's cab pull up, something cracked in that careful composure. Dad. Brandon caught him as Leo launched off the porch. The boy felt thinner than he should. Lighter. Brandon held him close, one hand cupping the back of his head the way he had when Leo was a baby. I've got you, Brandon said. I'm home. I've got you. Leo's voice was muffled against his shoulder. She left a note. The paper was taped to the front door, Marcia's neat handwriting stark against white notebook paper. Brandon, we're starting fresh in Florida. Stanley found an opportunity, and we're taking it. Your son isn't part of this family. He never was. The house is paid off, so you have somewhere to live. Don't try to find us. M. Brandon read it 3 times, each word landing like a punch. Your son, not our son. Leo was shaking beside him. She took everything, Leo said quietly. All her stuff. Craig's stuff too. Craig Zimmerman. He's been around a lot. Since you deployed. Leo's voice was small. Mom said I couldn't tell you. That it would upset you while you were in danger. Brandon's hands crushed the note. Craig Zimmerman. He knew the name. One of Stanley's business associates, some smooth-talking jackass in expensive suits. The rage that flooded through him was white-hot and familiar, the same cold fire that had kept him alive through ambushes and IED strikes. But Leo was watching him, and Brandon had learned control the hard way. He smoothed the note back out, folded it carefully, and pocketed it. When did you last eat? Mrs. Chun brought soup yesterday. I wasn't hungry. You're hungry now. Come on. Brandon grabbed the suitcase with one hand and kept the other on Leo's shoulder, grounding them both. Inside, the house was stripped. Bare walls where Marcia's decorative plates had hung. Empty spaces where her grandmother's furniture had sat. The TV gone. Even the good silverware, the set Brandon's mother had given them as a wedding present. They'd taken everything except the cheap furniture, Leo's bedroom set, and a few dishes. Brandon's footlocker from his first deployment sat untouched in the corner where he'd left it, probably too heavy for them to bother with. He made Leo scrambled eggs and toast, watched the boy eat slowly, mechanically. In the harsh kitchen light, Brandon could see the hollows under his eyes, the way his camp t-shirt hung loose on frame that should have been filling out with adolescent growth. What happened, Leo? Tell me everything. Leo set down his fork. For a moment, he looked far older than 12. Grandpa Stanley came over about 2 weeks ago. Him and Mom and Craig had meetings in the den. Late at night. I listened sometimes. What did they say? They were talking about Florida. About starting over. Grandpa kept saying fresh territory, and the setup is perfect. Craig talked about clients and distribution. Leo's eyes met his father's. I think Grandpa's into something bad, Dad. Brandon thought about Stanley Flynn. Retired pharmacist, respectable church elder, the kind of man who wore sweater vests and gave firm handshakes. He'd never warmed to Brandon, had made it clear his daughter could have done better than a soldier, but he'd been polite. Distant. What makes you think it's bad? Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out a thumb drive. The small black rectangle looked impossibly important in his thin fingers. 3 days before they left, Grandpa was here for dinner. He put his phone down to use the bathroom. I copied his cloud backup. Everything. Photos, texts, documents. I used the computer in my room while they were packing the truck. Brandon stared at his son. Why? Because Mom said I wasn't coming. She said I was your problem now, and that I'd served my purpose. Leo's voice cracked. She said horrible things about you, Dad. About how you were too stupid to see what was right in front of you. How you'd probably die over there anyway, and it didn't matter. I got mad and I wanted something. Some way to make them sorry. Brandon's hand trembled as he took the thumb drive. Have you looked at what's on here? Some of it. Enough. Leo pushed his plate away. Dad, Grandpa's been stealing from people. Military families. Families like ours. And Mom's helping him. They've been doing it for years. The laptop Brandon kept in his footlocker was old, but serviceable. He plugged in the thumb drive and waited for the files to load. Leo sat beside him on the couch, close enough that their shoulders touched. The first folder was labeled Accounts. Brandon opened it. Spreadsheets. Dozens of them. Names, dates, dollar amounts. Military personnel from bases across the Southeast. Beside each name, policy numbers, death benefit amounts, payout dates. Some entries were marked green with a single word, complete. Others were yellow, pending. A few were red, compromised. Brandon's name was there, yellow, for $100,000 next to it. Under status, it said, delayed, target survived deployment 4th. Reassess timeline. His hands were shaking now. Leo pointed to another file. Look at this one. Insurance claim forms. Falsified death certificates. Photos of staged accident scenes. Text message threads where Stanley coordinated with people at VA hospitals, funeral homes, insurance companies. A network of corruption spanning years, dozens of people, millions of dollars. One thread made Brandon's stomach turn. Stanley, the Welch situation needs resolution. For deployments, no results. Marcia, I'm working on it. He trusts me completely. Give me time. Stanley, time is expensive. Craig's ready to step in if you can't handle this. Marcia, I can handle it. One more deployment. I'll make sure the paperwork is perfect. The date was 6 months before his last deployment. Before he'd left for Afghanistan, Marcia had kissed him goodbye at this very door, tears in her eyes, promising to keep Leo safe. She'd been planning to have him killed. Brandon scrolled through more messages. References to the Florida operation. Plans to expand into Tampa and Miami. New contacts, new victims. The move wasn't escape, it was expansion. There's more, Leo said quietly. He opened another folder. Look at this. Photos. Crime scene photos that looked official but weren't in any database Brandon could access. Bodies in wrecked cars. Drug overdoses staged to look accidental. At least 15 different deaths over the past decade, each one connected to a military family's insurance claim. Stanley Flynn hadn't just been filing false claims. He'd been murdering people, and one of those people was supposed to be Brandon. Leo's small voice broke the silence. Are we going to the police? Brandon thought about it. Really thought about it. The evidence was solid, damning, but it had been obtained illegally by a 12-year-old kid. Chain of custody was broken. A good lawyer, and Stanley could afford the best, might get it suppressed. And even if it stuck, the trial would take months, maybe years. During that time, Stanley and his network would scatter, destroy evidence, disappear. The military had taught Brandon many things. One of them was that sometimes the official channels weren't enough. Sometimes you had to take direct action. He looked at his son, this brave, brilliant kid who'd been abandoned and betrayed but had still fought to protect his father. No, Brandon said. We're not going to the police. Not yet. What are we going to do? Brandon pulled up flight prices to Tampa. We're going to Florida. Why? Brandon smiled, and it was the same smile he'd worn before kicking down doors in Kandahar. Because they have our worst nightmare on that thumb drive. and we're going to deliver it in person. Leo's eyes widened. What's our worst nightmare? Us, Brandon said simply. They think I'm a stupid soldier and you're a disposable kid. They have no idea what we're capable of. He ruffled Leo's hair. But they're going to find out. For the first time in days, Leo smiled. They landed in Tampa 5 days later, on a humid Tuesday afternoon that felt nothing like Georgia. Brandon had spent those 5 days methodically, the way he'd planned operations in the Rangers. Intel first. Always intel. The thumb drive had been a goldmine. Not just evidence of crimes, but the entire structure of Stanley's operation. Bank accounts in the Caymans. Safe houses. A warehouse Stanley rented under a shell company. Contact lists. Photos of properties. Text messages revealing who in the network could be trusted and who was getting nervous. Most importantly, Stanley's new address in Clearwater. A sprawling waterfront property, the kind of place that screamed nouveau riche criminal trying to legitimize his money. Brandon had made copies of everything. Multiple copies, stored in multiple locations. Safety deposit boxes under false names. Cloud storage with deadman switches. If anything happened to him or Leo, everything would automatically go to the FBI, the military's Criminal Investigation Division, and 3 major newspapers. But he wasn't planning on anything happening to them. The rental car was a nondescript Camry. Brandon had learned a long time ago that the best way to move was to be invisible. He and Leo checked into a modest hotel near the airport, not the beachfront tourist traps where Stanley's people might notice them. First rule of operations, Brandon told Leo as they unpacked. Never rush. We take our time. We watch. We learn their patterns. How long? As long as it takes. Brandon pulled out a laptop and opened Google Maps. Your job is to be a kid. Normal 12-year-old on vacation with his dad. We go to the beach. We eat ice cream. We look like tourists. But while we're doing that, we're also watching. Understanding their routines. Finding the weak points. Leo nodded seriously. Like reconnaissance. Exactly like reconnaissance. Brandon felt a swell of pride. His son was sharp, adaptable. And Leo? If anything feels wrong, if you see anyone who looks familiar, you tell me immediately. These people are dangerous. I know. Leo's voice was quiet. Mom said I served my purpose. What did she mean? Brandon had been dreading this question. He sat down on the bed beside his son. I need you to understand something. Marcia? She's not who I thought she was. Who we thought she was. He chose his words carefully. I think she married me because Stanley told her to. Because I was military, which meant life insurance, death benefits. I think you were part of making that look real. A family man is less suspicious. So she never loved you? Or me? I don't know about love, buddy. I know I love you. You're my son in every way that matters. Brandon put his arm around Leo's shoulders. But Marcia and Stanley? They're criminals. They use people. That's what they do. What about my real mom? My biological mom? Brandon had wondered about that too. The timeline had always been strange. Marcia had been pregnant when they met, already showing. She'd told him a story about a one-night stand, a guy who'd disappeared. Brandon had fallen hard for her, had wanted to be a hero, save the struggling single mother. He'd proposed 3 months into dating, married her at City Hall, adopted Leo the day he was born. Now, looking through Stanley's files, Brandon had found a different story. A young woman named Patricia Meadows. Army wife. Husband killed in Iraq, or supposedly killed. Insurance claim, $500,000. But there was a note in Stanley's files. PM became problematic. Resolved. Child placed with M for cover. Resolved. That cold clinical word that meant murdered. Brandon wasn't ready to tell Leo that his biological mother had probably been killed by his grandfather. Not yet. I don't know, he said instead. But I promise you, we're going to find out the truth. All of it. That night, after Leo fell asleep, Brandon sat on the hotel balcony and made a list. Not a target list. He wasn't planning to kill anyone, no matter how much they might deserve it. He was better than that. Smarter. No, this was a list of pressure points. Ways to dismantle Stanley's operation piece by piece. Legal ways. Illegal ways. Ways that would hurt them where they lived. The money was the obvious target. Freeze the accounts, and Stanley's whole network would collapse. But that required federal involvement, which Brandon wasn't ready for yet. The properties were another angle. Stanley owned several under various LLCs. Real estate was hard to hide, easy to attack. But the real vulnerability was something else. Something Brandon had noticed in the message threads. Stanley was paranoid about his partners. He didn't trust Craig Zimmerman. Thought Craig was skimming. There were messages about teaching Craig a lesson and reminding him who's in charge. And Marcia? Stanley's own daughter? The messages suggested Stanley saw her as a liability too. Marcia's getting sloppy. Too emotional. After the Welch payout, she's out. They were all betraying each other, held together only by greed and mutual criminality. Brandon could work with that. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. Not to police. Not to federal agents. To ghosts. His squad might have taken casualties in Afghanistan, but plenty of Rangers were stateside now. Men he'd served with. Men who owed him favors. Men who knew how to move quietly, how to gather information, how to apply pressure without leaving fingerprints. By midnight, he had 3 confirmations. His brothers were coming to Florida. By dawn, he had a plan. The Clearwater house was obscene. 3 stories of white stucco and glass, perched on a private stretch of beach like a monument to stolen money. Brandon and Leo watched it from a public beach access point a quarter-mile away, sitting in beach chairs, looking like any other father and son enjoying the Florida sun. Brandon had a camera with a telephoto lens. To anyone watching, he was just taking photos of the ocean. In reality, he was documenting everyone who came and went from Stanley's house. Marcia emerged around 10 a.m., wearing designer sunglasses and a flowing cover-up that probably cost more than Brandon's monthly combat pay. She walked down to the beach with Craig Zimmerman, both of them laughing, drinks in hand. Not a care in the world. Leo's hand tightened on his armrest. That's them. I see them. Brandon kept his voice calm, measured. Remember, we're just watching today. But he was cataloging everything. The way Craig touched Marcia's lower back, possessive. The way Marcia kept glancing at her phone, nervous. The way neither of them looked happy despite their expensive surroundings. Stanley appeared an hour later, a portly man in a polo shirt and khakis. He walked with a cane, playing the role of harmless grandfather. But Brandon saw the way his eyes scanned the beach, always watching. A predator's awareness. Randy Good joined them mid-afternoon. Brandon recognized him from the files, Stanley's connection at a Tampa insurance company. They sat on the deck, heads close together, making plans. By evening, Brandon had a complete picture of their routine. Marcia and Craig played house. Stanley ran the operation. Various associates came and went. There were parties, business meetings, the appearance of legitimate success. All of it built on blood money. When do we move? Leo asked as they packed up their beach gear. Soon, Brandon said. But first, we're going to make them nervous. Very nervous. That night, Brandon's first call came in. Raoul Bass, a former ranger who now worked private security, had successfully placed tracking devices on all 3 of Stanley's vehicles. They'd know everywhere the family went. The second call was better. Rodney Carr, an Army intelligence specialist, had successfully hacked into Craig Zimmerman's email. The man was spectacularly stupid with passwords, and his messages were a treasure trove of incriminating details. The third call was best of all. Ken Arnold, who'd served with Brandon in 3 deployments and now worked as a private investigator in Miami, had found something interesting. Craig Zimmerman had a wife. A real wife, currently living in Atlanta, who had no idea her husband was shacked up with another woman in Florida. Her name's Virginia Elliott, Ken said over the phone. Well, Virginia Zimmerman legally. They never divorced. She's a lawyer, Brandon. Corporate law. Very smart. Very angry when I mentioned her husband might be committing fraud. Brandon smiled. Tell me more. Virginia Zimmerman, tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of cold fury that came from being betrayed, arrived in Tampa 2 days later. Brandon met her at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. You're the soldier, she said, sitting down across from him. No preamble. Yes, ma'am. And my husband is living with your wife in my beach house. She said it flatly, a statement of fact. The house I purchased before we were married. I didn't know it was yours. Craig forged my signature on the deed transfer 6 months ago. I only found out when Mr. Arnold contacted me. Virginia's eyes were ice. I've already filed police reports. Fraud, identity theft, forgery. But Mr. Arnold suggested you might have additional information that would interest me. Brandon slid a folder across the table. Inside, selected excerpts from Stanley's files. Nothing about the murders, not yet. Just the financial fraud. Insurance scams. Craig's involvement. Bank account numbers showing money Craig had stolen from the operation. Money he'd hidden from both Stanley and Virginia. Virginia read in silence, her expression unchanging. Finally, she looked up. This is a copy. Yes. You have more. Much more. And you want what exactly? Money. I want Craig to hurt, Brandon said simply. I want Stanley Flynn to hurt. I want my ex-wife to understand she made a mistake. You want your husband punished and your property back. We have aligned interests. Virginia considered him. You're not going to the police. Eventually. But first, I want them to feel what they did to us. To my son. Brandon's voice hardened. They left a 12-year-old boy on a porch to starve. They stole everything. They thought we'd just accept it. Disappear. And you're not the disappearing type. No, ma'am. Virginia Zimmerman smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut glass. Neither am I. What do you need? What Brandon needed was access. Virginia had keys to the beach house, her beach house, legally. She had legal standing to enter. She also had security codes, knew the layout, understood Craig's habits. More importantly, she had rage to match Brandon's own. They spent 3 hours planning. Virginia was methodical, precise. A lawyer's mind applied to revenge. By the time they finished, Brandon felt like he'd found an unexpected ally. One more thing, Virginia said as they prepared to leave. Your son, Leo, is he safe? He's with friends. Military families I trust. It was true. Brandon had arranged for Leo to stay with Raoul Base's family for a few days. Leo needed to be away from what came next. Good. Because what we're about to do, it's going to get ugly. I'm counting on it. The first domino fell 3 days later. Craig Zimmerman woke up to find his car missing. Not stolen, towed. By a legitimate towing company, acting on a legitimate court order, because the car was registered to Virginia Zimmerman and she'd reported it stolen. He also found his credit cards declined, bank accounts frozen, because Virginia had filed for divorce and, with evidence of his fraud, had gotten emergency injunctions against their joint assets. And when he tried to access his hidden accounts, the ones with Stanley's money that he'd been skimming, he found them empty, completely empty. Brandon watched it all unfold via hacked security cameras. He saw Craig's panic, saw him screaming at Marcia, saw Marcia calling Stanley in a fury. Stanley arrived an hour later, and the shouting match was spectacular. You married idiot. Stanley's voice carried through the open windows. You let your wife find out. I didn't know she knew. How did she? Fix it. Now. We have 2 million tied up in those accounts. It's gone. Someone cleaned them out. Brandon had indeed cleaned them out. The money was currently sitting in an account managed by Ken Arnold, who would be distributing it to Patricia Meadows' surviving family members, once Brandon figured out who they were. Blood money returned to the family of its victim. But Stanley and Craig didn't know that yet. They just knew their carefully hidden fortune had vanished. The second domino, Randy Good, Stanley's insurance contact, received a visit from his company's internal fraud division. Someone had anonymously sent evidence of his involvement in false claims. Randy was suspended pending investigation. Third domino, Marcia discovered that her nursing license was under review. Allegations of stealing medications from the hospital where she'd worked in Georgia. Prescriptions written under stolen DEA numbers. All backed up by evidence from Stanley's own files. By evening, the beach house was in chaos. Shouting, accusations, panic. Brandon sat in his hotel room and watched it all on his laptop. Live feeds from cameras his team had planted. Audio from devices Virginia had placed during her legal inspection of her property. They're turning on each other, Raoul observed, watching over Brandon's shoulder. Just like you said they would. Criminals always do, Brandon said. Fear and greed. That's all that holds them together. Take away the money and add enough pressure. His phone buzzed. Ken Arnold. We found her, Ken said without preamble. Patricia Meadows' family. Her sister, Kirsten Meadows. Lives in North Carolina. She's been looking for Patricia for 13 years. Brandon's chest tightened. What does she know? She filed missing persons reports. Hired private investigators. Patricia disappeared right after her husband supposedly died in Iraq. The army said Patricia got the death benefits, but Kirsten never saw a dime. She thought Patricia had run off. Maybe couldn't handle the grief. She's going to want to know what happened. Yeah. Ken's voice was somber. You ready to tell her? Brandon thought about Leo. About the truth he'd eventually have to share. Set up a meeting. But Ken, let's make sure we have everything first. She deserves the whole story. Understood. After the call, Brandon sat in silence. The revenge he was orchestrating felt good, righteous. But it wasn't bringing anyone back. Patricia Meadows was still dead. Leo's biological mother was still gone. Raoul put a hand on his shoulder. You okay? No, Brandon said honestly. But I will be. Once this is finished. The next phase required patience. Brandon waited, watched Stanley's network crumble. Randy Good turned state's witness, cutting a deal with prosecutors. 2 other associates, seeing the walls close in, disappeared, taking whatever money they could grab. Stanley tried to hold the operation together, but he was hemorrhaging resources and allies. Every day brought new problems. More frozen accounts. More investigations. More heat. And through it all, Stanley had no idea who was behind it. Brandon made sure of that. Everything looked like coincidence, like the natural consequences of years of crime catching up to them. Virginia's divorce seemed like a betrayed wife's revenge. Randy's investigation looked like routine internal affairs. The license reviews appeared to be standard procedure. Only Stanley, in his paranoia, suspected a coordinated attack. But he suspected Craig, or Randy, or one of his other partners. Never a dead soldier's husband. Never a kid they'd thrown away. 2 weeks after arriving in Florida, Brandon finally made his presence known. He waited until sunset, then walked right up to the beach house's front door and knocked. Craig answered, looking haggard. When he saw Brandon, his face went white. You. Me. Brandon agreed pleasantly. Is Stanley home? We need to talk. Craig tried to slam the door. Brandon's boot stopped it. Months of combat training versus a soft criminal who'd never thrown a real punch. It wasn't even a contest. Brandon pushed inside, calm and controlled. Marcia appeared from the kitchen, froze when she saw him. Brandon? What are you? How did you find you? Brandon smiled. Leo's smarter than you thought. Both of you underestimated us. Fatal mistake. Stanley emerged from a back room, cane in hand. Up close, his resemblance to every other predator Brandon had faced was striking. Same cold eyes. Same calculating expression. You need to leave, Stanley said evenly. This is private property. Actually, it's Virginia Zimmerman's property, Brandon replied. But I'm not here to debate real estate law. I'm here to make you an offer. We're not interested in. Brandon pulled out his phone, played an audio clip. Stanley's voice, from one of his phone calls. Make it look like an accident. The wife needs to disappear. Can't have her talking. Marcia's face went even paler. Craig looked sick. I have everything, Brandon said quietly. Every file. Every message. Every piece of evidence of every crime you've committed for the past 15 years. Murders, fraud, theft. All of it. Stanley's hand tightened on his cane. If you had real evidence, you'd have gone to the police. Oh, I will. But first, I wanted you to understand something. Brandon's voice went cold, the tone he'd used in Afghanistan when questioning enemy combatants. You took everything from me. My wife. My home. You tried to take my son. You were planning to take my life. That's absurd. Patricia Meadows, Brandon said, and watched Stanley flinch. That's who Leo really is. Your grandson. The child of a woman you murdered after stealing her husband's death benefits. You gave her baby to Marcia to make her marriage to me look legitimate. To make me look like an easy target. Marcia made a small sound, almost a whimper. You turned Leo into a prop. A disposable tool. And when he wasn't useful anymore, you threw him away like garbage. Brandon took a step closer. That was your mistake. Because that disposable kid? He's smarter than all of you combined. He saved me. And now, I'm going to destroy you. Stanley's composure cracked. What do you want? Money? We can pay you. Make this go away. I don't want your blood money. Brandon pulled out an envelope. This is a full confession. You're going to sign it. All 3 of you. Every crime, every victim, every detail. You're going to hand over every account, every asset, everything you've stolen. And if we don't, Stanley tried for defiance, but his voice shook. Then I send everything to the FBI, the Florida State Attorney, the Military Criminal Investigation Division, and the media. You'll spend whatever time you have left in prison. And trust me, they don't treat cop killers well in prison. Or people who murder soldiers' families. You can't prove murder, Stanley said, but his voice was defeated. Actually, I can. Brandon played another audio file. Stanley's voice again. The Meadows woman is buried at the Osceola construction site. 3rd foundation, eastern corner. Make sure it stays buried. The blood drained from Stanley's face. I had that site excavated last week, Brandon said. Anonymous tip to the police. They found Patricia Meadows' remains yesterday. Dental records confirmed it. The FBI is very interested in who put her there. It was a bluff, mostly. Brandon had found references to the burial site in Stanley's files, had passed the information to authorities, but he didn't know if they'd actually excavated yet. But Stanley didn't know that. The old man's knees buckled. He sat down heavily on the nearest chair. You're finished, Brandon said. The only question is whether you confess now and maybe get a deal, or whether you go down fighting and take maximum sentences. Craig broke first. I'll sign. Jesus Christ, I'll sign anything. I can't go to prison. Shut up, Stanley snarled, but it was too late. Marcia was crying now, mascara running down her face. Brandon, please. I'm sorry. I was just doing what my father told me. You left a child to starve, Brandon said flatly. Your apologies mean nothing. He produced 3 sets of documents. Confessions, meticulously detailed. Asset disclosures. Names of every person in their network. Sign. Now. They signed. All 3 of them, hands shaking, signing away their freedom and their fortunes. Brandon witnessed each signature, recorded it on video, made sure everything was legal and binding. When it was done, he collected the documents and stood. Federal agents will be here in an hour, he said. I'd suggest you use that time to say goodbye to your freedom. And to each other. Because where you're going, they separate co-conspirators. You bastard, Stanley whispered. You self-righteous bastard. No, Brandon said. I'm a father who protected his son. You're the bastard who threw him away. Remember that when you're in prison. He walked out of the beach house and didn't look back. Outside, the Florida sunset painted the sky in oranges and purples. Brandon called Ken Arnold. It's done. Send the FBI. Already on their way. Brandon, that was one hell of a bluff about the excavation. Who said it was a bluff? Brandon smiled. I made some calls to the Osceola County Sheriff's Department this morning. They're very interested in that construction site now. Ken laughed. You magnificent bastard. Brandon's next call was to Virginia Zimmerman. Your husband signed a confession. You'll have your house back, and he'll be in prison for the next 20 to 30 years. Good. Virginia's voice was satisfied. Thank you, Brandon. For everything. Thank you. Couldn't have done it without you. His final call was to Raul. Bring Leo to the hotel. It's time to go home. Leo burst into the hotel room an hour later and threw his arms around Brandon. Did it work? Did you get them? We got them, Brandon confirmed. All of them. Stanley, Marcia, Craig, Randy, and the others. The FBI has everything. What happens now? Now? Federal prosecution. Stanley's looking at life in prison for murder, fraud, conspiracy. Marcia and Craig probably 20 to 30 years as accomplices. Randy cut a deal, but he'll still do time. Leo was quiet for a moment. Then, what about me? About my mom. My real mom. Brandon sat down, pulled Leo close. Her name was Patricia Meadows. She was an army wife. Your father, your biological father, was killed in Iraq. But he was killed for real, Leo. He was a hero. And she? Stanley murdered her to steal your father's death benefits. He gave you to Marcia to hide the crime, to make his operation look legitimate. Brandon's voice was gentle but firm. She loved you, Leo. She didn't want to give you up. I found her journal in Stanley's files. She fought for you. He killed her for it. Leo's eyes filled with tears. Did she have family? Anyone who knew about me? Your aunt, Kirsten Meadows. She's been looking for Patricia for 13 years. She's been looking for you. Brandon showed Leo a photo on his phone. A woman with kind eyes and Patricia's smile. She wants to meet you. If you want to meet her. Yes, Leo whispered. I want to know where I came from. Then we'll make that happen. But Leo, you need to understand something. Patricia was your biological mother. Marcia was the woman who raised you, even if she didn't do it well. But I'm your dad. I chose you. I will always choose you. Biology doesn't change that. Leo hugged him tighter. I know, Dad. I never doubted that. They sat together in the quiet hotel room, the Florida night settling around them. Outside, somewhere in Clearwater, federal agents were arresting Stanley Flynn and his accomplices. The network was broken. The stolen money would be returned to victims' families. Justice, in its slow, grinding way, was being served. But for Brandon and Leo, this was something more than justice. This was survival. This was choosing to fight back when the world tried to break them. This was family. 3 months later, Brandon and Leo stood outside a small house in North Carolina. Kirsten Meadows opened the door before they could knock, as if she'd been waiting by the window. She looked at Leo, and her hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God, you look just like her. Just like Patricia." Leo glanced at Brandon, who nodded encouragement. "Hi," Leo said. "I'm Leo. I guess I'm your nephew." Kirsten pulled him into a hug, tears streaming down her face. "I've been looking for you for so long. For your mother for so long. I thought I'd lost you both." Brandon stood back, letting them have the moment. Kirsten invited them in, showed them photo albums of Patricia. A smiling young woman with Leo's eyes, his nose, his stubborn chin. A woman who'd loved her husband, who'd been excited about her baby, who'd disappeared into Stanley Flynn's nightmare. Over coffee, Brandon told Kirsten everything, not sparing details. She deserved the truth, all of it. When he finished, Kirsten was crying again, but she was also smiling. "Thank you," she said, "for protecting him, for bringing him back to me." Patricia would have been grateful. Patricia was Leo's mother, Brandon said. "But if it's okay with everyone, I'd like to keep being his dad." "Of course," Kirsten said immediately. "Of course. You're his father in every way that matters." She looked at Leo. "But I'd love to be part of your life, if you'll let me. To tell you about your mother, your father. To be your family." Leo looked at Brandon, who nodded. "I'd like that," Leo said. They stayed in North Carolina for a week. Kirsten showed Leo his mother's hometown, his grandparents' graves, the life Patricia had lived before Stanley destroyed it. It was bittersweet, beautiful, healing. On their last night, Kirsten pulled Brandon aside. "The money," she said quietly, "from the accounts you recovered. That's Patricia's death benefits, isn't it? And other families. Some of it. About $2 million, all told. I've been working with lawyers to distribute it to the families Stanley victimized. Patricia's portion, your portion, is about $500,000. Kirsten shook her head. "I don't want it. Put it in trust for Leo. For his education. His future. That's what Patricia would have wanted." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "And Brandon? You kept her son safe. You brought him home. That's worth more than any amount of money." The trial lasted 4 weeks. Brandon and Leo attended every day, sitting in the gallery, watching justice unfold. Stanley Flynn took the stand in his own defense, a mistake. Under cross-examination, he crumbled. The prosecution had everything: the confessions, the files, Patricia Meadows' body, testimony from Randy Good and others who'd flipped. Stanley's lawyer tried to argue coercion, but the jury saw through it in minutes. Guilty on all counts. Life in prison without parole. Marcia pled out, got 25 years. Craig took a deal for 30. Randy Good, who'd cooperated extensively, got 8 years in witness protection. When the verdicts were read, Stanley looked across the courtroom at Brandon. No words, just a long stare. Brandon stared back, unblinking, unapologetic. Stanley looked away first. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Brandon gave a brief statement. Justice was served today for Patricia Meadows and every other family Stanley Flynn destroyed. That's all I have to say. Leo stood beside him, tall and proud. Not a disposable kid anymore. A survivor. A fighter. They flew back to Georgia 2 days later. The house on Maple Street was still there, still theirs. Brandon had sold off Marcia's remaining things, donated most of it to charity. The walls were bare, but the house felt cleaner somehow. Ready for a fresh start. Leo's bedroom got a makeover. New paint, new furniture, posters of his choosing. A real kid's room, not the sparse space Marcia had maintained. Brandon's footlocker went into the attic. He didn't need the reminders of deployment anymore. Didn't need to live like he was always about to ship out. This was home. This was permanent. School started in the fall. Leo made friends easily, joined a robotics club, started talking about college's years before he needed to. The hollow-eyed kid from the porch was gone, replaced by a confident young man who knew his worth. On weekends, they visited Kirsten in North Carolina. She taught Leo about Patricia, about his heritage, about the family he came from. It didn't replace what was lost, but it honored it. And slowly, Brandon started to heal too. The anger that had driven him through those Florida weeks faded into something quieter, more sustainable. Not forgiveness, he'd never forgive what they'd done, but acceptance. Understanding that he'd done everything he could, that justice had been served, that his son was safe. One evening, As they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Leo asked, "Do you think we'll ever be normal? Just regular people?" Brandon considered it. "We were never going to be normal, buddy. We went through something most people can't imagine. But normal's overrated anyway. What are we then?" "Survivors," Brandon said. "A family that refused to break. That's better than normal any day." Leo smiled. "Yeah, I like that better anyway." They sat in comfortable silence as the Georgia twilight settled around them. Somewhere in Florida, in a federal prison, Stanley Flynn was learning what it meant to lose everything. Marcia and Craig were in separate facilities, cut off from each other, from their money, from their freedom. But here, on a simple porch in a simple town, a father and son had everything that mattered. They had each other. And they had won. The story that had started with abandonment and betrayal had ended with justice and redemption. Brandon had kept his promise to protect his son, to make their enemies pay, to build something better from the ashes. Leo leaned against his shoulder, and Brandon put his arm around him. "Love you, Dad. Love you too, kiddo. Always." The porch light flickered on as darkness fell, a beacon against the night. Inside, the house waited, not empty anymore, but full of possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures. But tonight, they rested. Tonight, they were home. And that was enough. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.